The room was quiet, too quiet. A young woman stood inside her home, probably thinking the worst part of her life had already happened. She had argued with her father before. Families fight, words are said, emotions explode and then calm down. That is how most people expect things to go. But this time was different. Standing in front of her was her father, a man who should have been the person protecting her from the dangers of the world. Instead, witnesses later said he looked at his daughter and delivered a chilling threat. "I will make you crazy for good." Those words sounded confusing at first. Maybe they sounded like the kind of angry sentence people throw around during arguments. But within moments, the meaning of those words became horrifyingly clear. He was not speaking metaphorically. He was about to destroy her life. The story that shocked the world took place in 2023 and involved a young woman named Shafina Khatun, a name that became tragically associated with one of the most disturbing family crimes reported in recent years. The man who threatened her was her own father, Yunus Ali. What happened next was so brutal that investigators, police officers, and even hardened journalists struggled to describe it without emotion. But to understand how a father could reach such a point, you have to go back and understand the conflict that had been growing inside that household for months. Shafina was not someone trying to cause trouble. She was simply trying to live her life on her own terms. She had her own dreams, her own opinions, and her own choices about how she wanted to live. And that was exactly what her father could not accept. According to reports, the conflict inside the family had been building for some time. Yunus Ali strongly disapproved of some of the decisions Shafina had made about her personal life. In many traditional families around the world, generational conflict can become intense when younger family members push for independence. But what was happening in this household went far beyond a typical family disagreement. Neighbors later said they had heard arguments in the past, raised voices, emotional confrontations, but nobody imagined it would escalate into something so violent. On the day of the attack, tensions inside the house reached a boiling point. Witnesses later described hearing shouting coming from inside the home. The argument between father and daughter grew louder and more heated. Shafina tried to defend herself verbally. She tried to explain her choices. She tried to reason with him. But Yunus Ali was not listening. And then he delivered that terrifying sentence, "I will make you crazy for good." What he meant was something investigators later confirmed with chilling clarity. He walked toward his daughter carrying a container filled with gasoline. At first, Shafina probably could not believe what she was seeing. The mind has a way of refusing to accept danger when it comes from someone we trust. A father pouring gasoline on his own child does not fit into the normal expectations of reality. But it was happening. Gasoline splashed across her clothes and the floor. Shafina began screaming, begging him to stop. For a moment, there was still time for Yunus Ali to step back. There was still time to drop the lighter. There was still time to remember that this was his daughter. Instead, he struck the match. Flames exploded around her. The fire spread instantly because of the gasoline. What had been a home turned into a scene of unimaginable horror in seconds. Neighbors heard the screams. Some ran outside trying to understand what was happening. Others called emergency services immediately. Inside the house, Shafina fought desperately to survive. Fire consumed her clothing and spread rapidly across her body. She tried to escape, but the damage had already become catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived, the situation was already beyond control. Shafina was rushed to the hospital with severe burns covering most of her body. Doctors worked frantically to stabilize her. Burn injuries are among the most painful and complicated medical emergencies a human being can experience. Every second matters. Every decision doctors make can mean the difference between life and death. For hours, medical teams fought to save her. Meanwhile, police officers began piecing together what had happened inside that house. The evidence quickly pointed to Yunus Ali. He had not run far. Authorities detained him soon after the incident. The man who had set his own daughter on fire was now sitting in police custody, while doctors tried to save the life he had nearly destroyed. As news of the attack began spreading, people across the region were stunned. How could a father commit such an act? What could possibly push someone to burn their own child alive? Investigators interviewed neighbors, family members, and witnesses. The picture that emerged was one of escalating control, anger, and resentment over Shafina independence. For Yunus Ali, the conflict had become personal. He believed his daughter had dishonored him through her choices. Instead of dealing with those feelings through conversation, distance, or even simple disagreement, his anger transformed into something far darker. It became rage. And rage, when mixed with control and humiliation, can lead people to commit acts that destroy entire families. While Shafina fought for her life in the hospital, doctors documented the extent of her injuries. Severe burns covered large portions of her body. Her condition remained critical for days. But in a heartbreaking turn, despite the efforts of medical teams, Shafina Khatun eventually died from her injuries. Her death turned the case from attempted murder into a homicide investigation. The public reaction was immediate and intense. People demanded justice. Activists and community leaders spoke out about the deeper issues that sometimes lead to family violence. Many pointed to the dangers of extreme control inside families, where personal freedom becomes a source of conflict rather than support. Meanwhile, prosecutors began building the legal case against Yunus Ali. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness testimony, physical evidence from the house, medical reports, and Yunus' own statements to investigators all pointed in the same direction. This was not an accident. It was a deliberate act, and the chilling words he had spoken before lighting the match became one of the most haunting elements of the entire case. "I will make you crazy for good." Those words revealed intent. They showed that the act had been premeditated in that moment of rage. As the legal process moved forward, people across the world followed the case closely. Stories like this trigger a deep emotional response because they violate the most fundamental expectation humans have about family. Parents are supposed to protect their children. That expectation is almost universal across cultures and societies. When that trust is shattered in such a violent way, it forces people to confront uncomfortable truths about anger, control, and the potential darkness inside human behavior. But there is another side to stories like this that often goes unnoticed. And this is where the conversation becomes even more important. Family conflicts exist everywhere. Cultural expectations, generational differences, financial pressures, and personal choices can create tension inside households. Millions of families navigate those conflicts every day. Most manage to resolve them through communication, distance, compromise, or simply time. But when anger replaces communication and control replaces understanding, the consequences can become catastrophic. The tragedy of Shafina Khatun is not just about one crime. It is about the warning signs that appear long before violence erupts. Neighbors had heard arguments. Family members knew tensions existed. But no one imagined the situation could escalate into murder. This raises an uncomfortable but necessary question. How many families around the world are living with similar tensions right now? How many arguments are happening behind closed doors that could spiral out of control if anger is allowed to dominate reason? And even after the court proceedings began, the emotional weight of the case did not fade. Investigators who worked on the file later admitted that some crimes stay with you longer than others. This was one of them. Not just because of the brutality of the act, but because of the relationship between the victim and the attacker. A stranger committing violence is horrifying, but when the person responsible is a parent, the shock becomes even deeper. People who knew Shafina Khatun described her as someone who simply wanted control over her own future. She had dreams like millions of young women around the world. She wanted independence, dignity, and the freedom to make decisions about her life. None of those desires should ever place someone in danger. Yet in this case, those dreams became the trigger for a deadly confrontation with Yunus Ali. The tragedy forced communities and leaders to confront uncomfortable questions about authority inside families and the limits of control parents should have over adult children. Conversations began about respect, personal freedom, and how unresolved anger inside households can slowly grow into something destructive. For many people following the story, the most haunting thought remained the same. One moment of rage destroyed 2 lives. And it started with a sentence that sounded like a threat, but ended as a tragedy. Stories like this force society to confront those questions. They also remind us of something very simple but very powerful. Words matter. Anger matters. And the moment someone chooses violence, everything changes forever. For Yunus Ali, that moment lasted only seconds. Lighting the match took less than a second, but the consequences will last the rest of his life. For Shafina Khatun, those seconds cost her everything. Her dreams, her future, her life. The tragedy left a permanent scar on everyone who knew her. It also left a message that continues to echo long after the headlines fade. Family should never become a battlefield. Disagreements should never become death sentences. And anger should never be allowed to turn love into violence. Yet history shows that when emotions spiral out of control, people are capable of acts they never imagined themselves committing. That is why stories like this must be told. Not for shock value, not for sensationalism, but as reminders. Reminders that the line between conflict and catastrophe can be thinner than we think. And sometimes, the most dangerous words a person can hear are spoken not by strangers, but by someone they once trusted completely. I will make you crazy for good. For Shafina Khatun, those words were the last warning before everything went up in flames. And for the rest of the world, they remain a haunting reminder of what can happen when rage replaces humanity.